This is an activity I oftentimes do early in the semester, that part where we're talking about information literacy, reading articles, that kind of thing. The reason that I started doing it is that I'll oftentimes talk about plagiarism quite a bit to make sure that people understand why it's really, really important to do everything you can to avoid plagiarizing, to do things like make sure you're citing things that aren't your own words. And that's really important, of course, but I've had some students get a little bit afraid. I've had people actually on papers kind of say, do I have to cite everything, every single sentence? And usually not, but I definitely understand, well, actually always not. There's really never a good reason to cite every single sentence. When you write a paper, you want it to be a combination of other people's facts and ideas that you take and synthesize into your own ideas and opinions and your own conclusion that's based on the evidence. So that's really important. So it should be a combination of cited statements, but also kind of your own thing. Hopefully you've gone over this worksheet already, and again, you've started doing a couple of the examples. And what we'll do is we'll talk about some of them, not really the first one where I sort of provide the answers, but I'll kind of talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with this assignment. And basically it's just a few examples, things I've taken from other writing sources. And, you have usually just a few sentences, and kind of you go step by step where we have numbers at the end of each sentence. And hopefully you've already decided, based on what it says in the introduction here, do you need a citation? So what should be cited, like it says there, whenever you present somebody else's idea, and again, there are several reasons for this: to give credit where it's due, for one thing, and also to sort of show that you got your idea from somewhere. Like on the other side of things, we've talked about how important it is for sources of information to provide a citation and let you know that they're not just making things up. What they're talking about is actually from real research. So you want to be able to do the same thing and say you didn't make stuff up, you actually did your homework, and you found evidence that something is true that you're talking about, and you place a citation in where you're writing, and that sort of shows that it comes from somewhere. But we also talk about situations where you don't have to cite some things. So it shouldn't really be every sentence. Usually within a paragraph, if I can tell that a bunch of ideas really come from the exact same source, you don't have to cite every single sentence. You should cite something at least once a paragraph. So for instance, in your writing, if you guys write papers, if you use one source that you cite over and over again, multiple places throughout the paper, probably at least once a paragraph where you cite that particular work, you should cite it. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to cite it every single time that you talk about it or at every sentence that you're drawing from that same paper, as long as it's reasonably clear that if you're stringing a bunch of sentences together, like you have an entire paragraph on a particular paper, you don't have to cite it multiple times within that paragraph, within that one single same train of thought. So, like it says there, things that you don't really need to cite, sentences that are right before or right after citation, where it's clear you're still talking about the cited material. Your own arguments, of course, that is something that you don't cite. So you might cite some information, you might cite several studies, and then you sort of start to build your own argument. Based on this, we can conclude, that kind of thing. Obviously, that's pretty clearly your own analysis, and in most papers you write, your professors are going to want to see that. So again, a little bit of cited material, but then you take it beyond what's already there. You create an original contribution out of a few different cited sources. So obviously you're not going to cite that because it's something you came up with. Lastly, oftentimes when you have a topic sentence and you're just kind of introducing a general concept, and maybe you've read a couple of papers or a couple of sources, and you kind of come up with a topic that ties them all together, and then throughout the rest of that paragraph, you're going to be citing things where appropriate. Because of that, if this seems a little subjective, it kind of is. It's really about writing style. It's really about what gives you the best flow in a particular paper. So oftentimes there are not going to be hard and fast answers. Sometimes there are. So for instance, if you directly quote, you have to put a citation in. And in APA style, you have to put the author's last name, the year, and the page that you're getting it from. Usually in APA style, it's just author's last names and the year. You can look at that Purdue OWL site that I link on D2L if you want a little bit of a refresher on that. You either have to put things in quotation marks, or if it's a long quote, you have to do a block quotation where you kind of set it off and sort of change the margins in many cases. And that makes it clear that it's a quote, that you are word for word copying something that somebody else wrote. Again, it's fine to do that as long as you make it clear that's a quote that you copied and pasted and you're citing it appropriately. So you have to go above and beyond just a citation, where usually, even if you're paraphrasing somebody, so you're just taking their ideas, you should cite them. So we have this example on the first page, and it's got, again, numbers at the end of every sentence. And the question is, so hopefully you've gone through this already, at what points would you put a citation? Here on the next page, I give you a couple of examples. So where it says after the reference, so, I made sure to cite my sources. Where am I getting this from exactly? It's a quote from an article on critical thinking. And we sort of talk about, you can see the answer there, how I would cite things. So for instance, the very first sentence you saw is a topic sentence that you would expand upon. I would not necessarily put a citation in the very first sentence there. Part 2 should have a citation because the writer is talking about collaborative learning. Unless they're defining it right then and there, in other words, unless that's their original contribution, they should definitely cite where are they getting that definition of collaborative learning from. 3 and 4, maybe, maybe not. Sentence 5 is also a general topic sentence that you wouldn't necessarily have to have a citation as long as you were also citing sentence 6 and 7. So hopefully that made some sense to you. And if you haven't done so already, please go on and do the rest of them, because we'll talk about them now. Okay, let's look at the first one, the one in the middle of the page that said, where should the citations go? The one that starts the breadth of topics, etc. This is an intro chapter from a cognitive science textbook. So they introduce it by saying, sentence 1, should that be cited? The breadth of topics studied by any single psychology department is staggering, so on and so forth. Well, probably not. We wouldn't necessarily have to, which wouldn't mean to say it's wrong to cite that very first sentence, but it's kind of a topic sentence, so I don't think you really have to, particularly since you're following it up with a few ideas that might have to be cited. Sentence 2, should that be cited? Absolutely. That's a direct quote. So you have a last name in there, Leahy, and you don't have the year that work was taken from, and you don't have the page number. So you would definitely have to add that at the end of sentence 2. So you need the author's last name in APA style, the year, and the page number that a direct quote was taken from. So that definitely has to be cited. Sentence 3, I don't think necessarily would need a reference, because again, you're kind of summarizing. So it sounds like the author is providing a little bit of his or her own analysis when they say that it is likely psychology is fated to be enormously fragmented. Unless they're getting that directly from what somebody else said, that sounds like their own thing, and so it wouldn't necessarily have to be cited. Sentence 4, again, is a topic sentence, and it's clearly what the author is trying to discuss, talking about psychology and then moving on to cognitive science. So introducing their own ideas. Similarly, sentence 5 seems like their own analysis and a thing they're contributing. Sentence 6, once again, that's a block quotation. So yeah, absolutely. Again, they're kind of citing it because the author says the website of the Cognitive Science Society states that. So they're letting you know this isn't a matter of plagiarism right there, but we would still make sure we would need to cite it appropriately if we're doing it in APA style, which would mean we have to at some point provide, if we can find it, the year that the Cognitive Science Society said that, and sort of, since this is on their website, not necessarily a page number, basically we do the best we can. If we're citing things from an article or a book, it can be very easy to find author's name, year of publication, and the page number. Some other references, not so much. You can always ask your professor in a situation where you're not certain how to cite a particular kind of statement. So something from a medium that's not immediately obvious. Again, that Purdue OWL website is very, very good. Or again, just pick up the APA style manual. That's another thing that I strongly recommend. I did that when I was in college. I didn't have a lot of money. Those things are not that expensive. They're usually in the range of like $20 to $30. And it's really nice to have an actual print copy that you can go through and make sure that you're writing and citing things appropriately. It was really, really enormously helpful. Again, this was before there was much of an internet and you could really look this kind of stuff up. But it really, really helped me out just to have that peace of mind that I could look up exactly how to cite things and how to phrase things and be in line with, APA style. If you're not a psych major, there's a good chance that your own major uses APA style, American Psychological Association. It's very common. Or if nothing else, sometimes your professor will allow you to use a common citation style as long as you pick one and stick with it. So that's one of the many reasons I teach APA. So it's not just for the psych majors. But if you're going to do that, you're going to need an A quotation as best as possible, author, year, and page number. Okay, let's look at the next one. Where should citations go in this case? Not sure why that marker looks a little different. So it's got a title, sentence 1. So I wouldn't necessarily, when we talk about 7-day weight loss pills, powerful key ingredients, obviously you don't need a citation there. That's kind of a title to the rest of it. So it talks about dandelion root in sentence 2 and how it works within the body instantly to stimulate the digestive system, etc. Well, yeah, you would definitely need a citation there because you're talking about something that's really fact-based. You would want to show that something like that is not just things you were saying, that you had you have a good reference, that product, that ingredient actually does that. Similarly, sentence 3. Dandelion helps the body flush away as much as 20 pounds of waste and toxin in just days. That's a very strong statement, and you're definitely going to want a very reliable citation that you can put on there. Next few sentences, next paragraph about oat bran fiber. Diets rich in fiber are proven to increase weight loss efforts. That's something where you really want a citation on there. That's because otherwise, it just sounds like you're making it up. Fiber is a powerful weight loss ingredient. This is sentence 5 because it helps you stay full longer. Probably want a citation on that one too. These are statements of different scientific facts, and each one is not simply a continuation or building upon the previous one. Each one of these sentences, the next one included, oat bran fiber is the best source of dietary fiber. So that's something different, and that's stating a different fact. So for each one of these, you would want a different citation, or possibly the same citation if you're getting it from the same place, at the end of each of these sentences. Number 7, moving on. Fiber is a critical ingredient for enhancing the digestive process to help flush away toxins and waste. Glucomannan, as the most effective appetite suppressant ever discovered, here in sentence 8. All of these are things that you want a citation on to show that you are not just making this stuff up. There is actual real evidence behind it. And as you might have guessed, where this comes from is a website that is probably kind of making stuff up and was really saying a bunch of stuff because not a single one of these had a citation attached to it. And obviously, huge problem if you're making statements like that. This isn't a matter of I would accuse these guys of plagiarism. It's more that I would accuse them of just basically rehashing things that they've heard to be true that there's really no evidence for. So again, with this bottom one, pretty much everything except statement 1, the title sentence, should have had a reference associated with it. Even though there are things within the same paragraph, each one of these sentences was a slightly different topic that presented different facts, so they all should have been cited. Okay, let's look at this last one. So where would we put the citations? Again, 7 sentences. This is from an intro psych textbook. What I would probably say is that sentence 1 and sentence 2, similar to the paragraph above, those are stating different facts for which we would want to provide evidence. So if we're saying slow wave sleep is the deepest level of sleep characterized by an increased proportion of very slow delta waves, you would want to put a citation on there. Now this is an intro psych textbook, so very often they don't necessarily put a citation on every sentence, but definitely if I were writing a paper one that would be potentially graded or reviewed by other people, I will want to show where I got that from. So where is my reference for the fact that there's a lot of very slow delta waves, which is a particular kind of brainwave, in slow wave sleep, in stage N3 sleep? Also, next sentence, this is the stage in which most sleep abnormalities occur. That's another fact, and that's a different statement for which I would want to make sure I would cite it. In fact, if I only put a citation at the end of sentence 2, if someone were being kind of nice, they would assume that sentence 1 and 2 both had the same citation, so that's where I was getting them both from. I'm not sure if that's the case with this particular citation, though. So usually I would want to be on the safe side and cite both of those, just because they're both presenting different facts where I need to show where I'm getting them from. Sentence 3, on the other hand, obviously we're jumping into the story in the middle, something about sleepwalking murders. That sounds like the author's analysis. The sleepwalking murders committed by Mr. Parks would have occurred in this stage. So this is likely not something that's going to be cited unless you can actually get something from a court document, something like that, that sort of speaks directly to that. It sounds more like the author kind of saying, based on what's going on in sentence 1 and sentence 2, here's my conclusion. So that author might not have cited sentence 3. Similarly, number 4, where it talks about skeletal muscle tone as we sleep, so the ability to move around, etc. That's something that you're going to want to cite. You're going to want to provide some evidence from where that's from. So again, obviously what this author is trying to do is build a case of what's going on sort of in a sleepwalking murder, and what things do we already know about sleep? What things is there an established literature on where there are already a bunch of studies? And from that, we can build what we think happens, whatever it was that Mr. Parks did. So sentence 4, you would definitely want to cite, because it's, a couple of statements of fact. It's possible for individuals to rise from their beds and engage in sometimes very complex behaviors, etc., but consciousness is distant. Again, where are we getting that from? So we would want to cite that. Moving on to the next sentence, would you cite number 5? It's okay if you said you did. I would also think it's okay if you kind of said, well, sentence 6 is really the backup for sentence number 5. So sentence 5 says, even in the deepest sleep, we are still aware of the external world. You could cite that. That's perfectly fine. That is something that would need some kind of citation, but it's okay if you were to say, well, maybe there's a reference for what he's saying in sentence 6. If smoke enters the room, we'll wake up, etc., or we're likely to react even though we are sound asleep. Maybe you provide a reference there, and that way someone reading it would kind of take it as, oh, okay, sentence 5, you were making a point, and then you backed it up by the more specific facts that you were citing in the next sentence. And then the very last one, number 7, probably, again, this is sort of the author building upon these facts, so I wouldn't necessarily say you would have to cite that very last sentence. I hope all of this makes some kind of sense, and I hope you're okay with the fact that maybe you provided a couple of different answers from what I got, and that's okay. Or at least it certainly can be. So usually when people cite things, when they write their own papers, people are given a lot of leeway to cite in different places depending on where they think it's appropriate. As long as you're more or less doing a good job and doing diligence to kind of show that I'm getting these facts from somewhere, I'm not making this stuff up, number 1, and number 2, I am making sure it's clear where this information is coming from, so that way I'm citing my sources, and there's really not much of a reasonable chance that somebody could accuse me of stealing other people's work, you'll be fine. With things like this, again, that's why we have a writing center. That's why you can always go to your professor. I'm certainly always good if students want to come and talk to me about papers where they're not exactly sure where they should be citing things and how often and that sort of thing. But this is sort of, at least to get you thinking about some of the situations where we would definitely want to cite some things, some situations where you probably would not, and sort of this gray area where, well, somewhere in here we need to cite this to show where we're getting stuff from. But again, it doesn't have to be every single sentence. And you just have to sort of kind of go with the flow of your own writing to see where you would stick a citation in. And again, always feel free to come talk to me if you kind of feel like you're not exactly sure with this kind of thing. Okay? All right.